Welcome everyone, good morning, afternoon and evening. Today is reset day also for EU. What we have to go over for today is a recap of how the raid rankings, the raid meta, the raid situation has been going in the last couple of weeks, because that is the last time we went to take a look at the raid situation. The interesting part, of course, is that between last time and this time, patch 9.2.5 got in between us. So we have gotten some few changes here and there. Let's just see what has moved in raid encounters for this update, for this June update of raid encounters. There are, as you might have seen from the thumbnail, there are a couple of standout changes this week in terms of better performing, outstanding specs in raid encounters. So let's quickly start our comparison with the last time we checked how the situation was for raiding. Starting first, it's worth pointing out that this is not yet fully expanded when it comes to the popularity, because of course it's not been long enough, right? It's not been enough resets to get the full value of the numbers. But when you look at the popularity, we suddenly start getting one other good change that we kept following week by week, which is the continued rise of survival. We watched them getting out of the bottom 3 and then the bottom 5, the bottom 8, the bottom 10, and now they even end up being 13th in popularity in the raid in this patch in 9.2.5. So definitely every week that goes by, survival is the highest it's ever been in its melee life so far. We do have some other minor changes which we will see soon in the performance that might mean something, which is Outlaw. Outlaw was at the absolute, complete and total bottom last time we checked. Now they are surprisingly rising in the numbers of picks that Outlaw is getting in the raid. Most of the other choices at the moment are not too different. We still have the top specs being roughly the same, like as you can see here, Balance, Fury, Marksmanship, Havoc, Destruction and Demonology, and now in 9.2.5 it's Balance, Destruction, Marksmanship, Fury, Havoc and Demonology. So pretty much it's the same top 6 of specs when it comes to popularity. We did leave each other last time when it comes to healers, with Holy Paladin getting slightly passed by Restoration Druid, but they were still all very close together. As you can see, Resto, Shaman and Druid plus Holy Paladin were all quite in the middle, gapped by a lot by Holy Priest. Now in 9.2.5 the gap is still there, it's more or less almost twice as much, so Holy Priest is still at the top, and then you have again Resto, Shaman, Resto Druid and Holy Paladin. This time Resto Druid is getting closer and closer to Resto. I thought that they might have passed Resto Shaman in these last couple of weeks, but so far they haven't quite gotten to that point. But more or less you can see that the layout of popular and in-demand healer specs in raid encounters so far, it's more or less the same, has been the same for a while now. Lastly, we have the tanks. We left the tanks with the dominance of Blood and Brewmaster Monk last time we checked. Now the dominance is still there, but perhaps there is even a harsher gap compared to the other tanks, because last time Prot Paladin was still in roughly the half range compared to the top 2 specs, but now when you look at it, the gap is even larger. There is still quite the dreaded bottom of Production Warrior, which isn't really very considered whatsoever, and then you have Guardian and Vengeance being quite low, but Prot Paladin wasn't as low before. Instead now they are dropping even more in popularity in raid encounters so far. However, what was more interesting to look out on in this recap of the raid wasn't the popularity, but rather the performance of this week. Because the performance this week sees a quite weird set of changes, right? When you start looking at the top, you do see very similar, familiar faces at the top in this tier. You see Demo, Destruction, you see Survival, you see Frost Death Knight, Elemental and Enhancement Shaman. They're all still there, more or less, not too much has changed. The bottom is also somewhat familiar, the mage specs are still pretty much there. You have Balance Druid also being there, Affliction Warlock obviously is still there. However, where we see the major changes are in Windwalker and in Outlaw Rogue. We can also for a second stop to the bottom and compare Arms Warrior being at the absolute bottom last time we checked, and now they are in the middle. So these are the 3 largest jumps in improvements in better results in the raid that we have gotten. And in case you might have forgotten or perhaps not paid attention, these 3 specs have also been buffed with this patch coming in. Pretty much all of the single target builders of Outlaw were getting buffed, pretty much all of the single target abilities of Windwalker were getting buffed, and even Arms Warrior got its single target abilities buffed. So now these specs are all rising significantly in the raid. Now the interesting part about this massive rise of these 3 specs so far is that for the case of Arms and for the case of Windwalker, this is mostly just a number tuning. It's just about them doing more damage with what they had before. This means that Windwalker is keeping the same combination of legendaries, it's keeping the same talents, so does Arms. They are keeping the same talents and legendaries and setup, and they are just doing more damage because they were buffed. So that's just it. Where things change is with Outlaw. Because where Outlaw is also improving significantly, they are not just improving because the damage has been increased with a buff. They're also improving because they are changing quite significantly their setup, the way they do damage because of these buffs. With the damage increase given to Pistol Shot and given to Between the Eyes, this has allowed Outlaw to ditch previously most used talent choices like Ghostly Strike and like Marked for Death to go for the more standard Weapon Master and deeper Stratagem, plus the change of the Covenant option and the subsequent Legendary and Legendary combo. Because now, with this buff, they are also moving to Ventir, they are also picking up Obedience, and they're also picking up a previously pretty much ignored Legendary, which is Concealed Blunderbuss, which is further empowering your Pistol Shot damage. So this new build, which is going to also change the amount of damage you do with the different abilities, now you do much more damage with Pistol Shot, obviously, on top of the buffs you have gotten. This has definitely improved their performance significantly in single target, so does Windwalker. These are the 2 that has received the largest gaps in improvement, basically, between last patch and this patch when it comes to performance. Unfortunately, so far, the other specs that were buffed in the 9.2.5 very small balance tuning, like Beast Mastery and Arcane Mage, don't seem to have gained too much from the buffs, at the very least for now. So that's the main change between the last time we looked at the situation in 9.2 and now that we are looking at it in 9.2.5. These 3 specs seem to have benefited the most from the buffs mostly to their single target damage, which is what has improved significantly with these buffs. For the first time after yet another round of nerfs to Anduin, he has finally dropped below the Jailer in terms of difficulty to kill. Last time, Anduin was still the one with the lowest chance to be defeated, 0.8% per pull, compared to the Jailer's 1.5%. Now, finally, after the 14th set of nerfs to Anduin, it's now the Jailer, in its rightful place of being the most tough to defeat in the raid. Also, to finish the look at this week of raiding, we can also take a look at just how often is each and every spec going to cause you to wipe, going to cause you to die, which of the specs is more prone to dying, which one dies the most, perhaps because they are more squishy, perhaps because they are less mobile, they are more easily caught by mechanics, or perhaps because they are populated by worse players. It depends how you look at this. So this is how it looks so far. We see that the death percentage of specs in both wipes and kills, so every time a boss is pulled, whether it's a wipe, so before the wipe is actually called, before everyone actually dies, or if the boss actually gets killed, you have to flip a coin. If it's heads, the Arms Warrior is going to stay alive. If it's tails, the Arms Warrior is going to die. Very similarly, a slightly weighted coin in favor of living goes to Discipline and to Retribution, having a 48% chance to die whenever you're pulling a boss. Discipline is the most immobile, the most difficult to play properly in the raid because they have to enter ramp windows for several seconds, which make them very, very vulnerable because moving would be a disaster for them, so they tend to be caught more often in bad positions and die. Who shouldn't be caught in bad positions, however, are Balance Druids, which are quite mobile and quite tanky, so they shouldn't really have any excuses for dying so much. Same goes for Windwalkers. Windwalker Monks should not be that squishy whatsoever. And then obviously we have the memes about Marksmanship Hunters, right? The Hunters, good old hunters dying to whatever mechanics. What is not so surprising, obviously, is that warlocks are amongst the tankier of specs, the least likely to die. You have Restoration Shaman and Restoration Druid being quite tanky as healers, with Holy Priest, which in this case is slightly bugged. It is counting too often the Guardian Angel being alive while you're wiping, as if the priest is actually still alive. So it's not exactly that low for Holy Priest. It is, however, a quite interesting look at specs, especially when you look at the difference. You know, when you start going towards the top, there is almost a 15% more chance for these specs to die compared than the ones at the bottom. So this was just in case you wanted to know who to blame when you are wiping. The specs at the top are more likely to be the culprits of the mistakes happening in the raid. But with that being said, this was all we had for our recap, for our start of June recap of the raid situations right at the start of patch 9.2.5. It looks like, at the very least, about half of the buffs of the balance tuning are actually having a decent result, at the very least for the raid so far. So, with this being said, thank you guys for watching the video. You can help by supporting this channel, of course, by liking and commenting down below, and also by subscribing to the channel. This one being a raid themed video. Please, everyone who came in and killed at the very least some 6 bosses this week in the raid can subscribe to the channel. People who are extending are also excused as well. Also, I am found, as usual, I am found on Twitter, right over here, to follow me for some very informative and thoughtful content, as well as you can further support me by going to Patreon, somewhere in this direction. Subscribing to my Patreon will also give you access to my Discord channel, where plenty of crucial discussion goes on every day, and you too can be a part of it. Thank you guys again, see you guys soon, and in the meantime, it's getting too hot. Oh man, it's not even summer. It's not even summer.